Hello everyone and welcome back to a brand new video, and welcome to day 53 of our F125 wet hot lap and track guides. Yes, we return with the 3 reverse circuits inside the game, of course first of all here and the Styrian Mountains at the Red Bull Ring. Of course, if you missed out on the last video from Abu Dhabi, I would highly recommend going back and checking it out, but I personally think all of the reverse circuits inside this game are actually quite difficult, especially in the wet conditions. Austria, there's a couple of horrible braking zones up towards the top of the circuit. As always, it's one of those tracks that's easy to learn, difficult to master, but I would say on the reverse layout it might be slightly more difficult to learn, to be completely honest as well. But of course, yeah, if you're new to this series and you don't know what this is about, I provide you with a race-ready wet setup inside F125. I talk you around the circuit, where your braking markers should be, what gears you want to be using, and everything like that. And then last but not least, I leave you with a hot lap. Of course, as always, timestamps will be linked down in the description below if you just want to head to a certain part of this video. A massive thank you to everybody for their continued support. But yeah, let's head then out onto the track. Well, making our way then down in towards the final corner, getting ready to start a lap then here from the Red Bull Ring reverse. The RRR, I think we're going to call it. You're going to be all the way up in 8th gear as we hug the right-hand side of the circuit in towards turn 1. Of course, this first corner does kind of inch slightly to the left and then, of course, drags yourself in even more. So you're going to be braking just at the 100-meter board, ready for turn 1. Try to attack as much of the curb on the outside as you can to open up the run through the first part of the corner, and then just flick it in after you go past the 50-meter board there. Be very careful. The track will kind of force the car to understeer out wide on the exit. Make sure you get the car wedged over the outside curb, but don't obviously run too wide there. Short shift up through 5th gear on the exit, and then through turn 2 again, you want to be taking a lot of curb on the entry, but allow the car to run nicely wide on the exit. You'll notice most of the curbs actually around Austria are kind of flat, and then you've got like this one big lip right on the outside of them, so you've got to be really careful, especially in the wet conditions. If you kind of get like the outside wheel wedged on that lip, you're going to lose bags of time, you know, a good 2-3 tenths of a second on every single traction zone. So be very careful with it, because that is probably the biggest way you can lose a lot of time around this lap. Leave the car in 7th gear though as we make our way in towards turn 3. Again, you want to get the car nice and tidy over this inside curb, and then just as you see the circuit, kind of the apex curve of turn 4, that is when you want to try and get on the anchors. Roll the car in though quite nicely. You don't want to use too much brake too early. Bring the car into 4th gear there and hug the apex. Don't use the apex curb, but hug it there through the entrance of the corner. Get the car nice and wide on the exit though. You're going to want to shift up to 5th gear and leave the car in 5th as again avoid the inside curb through this next turn there. Allow the car to run nicely wide on the exit, but again being very careful of that curbing on the outside, and then up into 6th gear as we make our way up towards the top of the hill. This is probably the worst corner of this entire lap, in my personal opinion. You want to be aiming to nudge the brakes at the 100-meter board, but you want to try and get a lot of the braking done early as you try and slow the car down, but still trying to rotate the front end in just a little bit through the second part of the curbing. Avoid the inside curb. Very easy to get wheel spin on the exit, so I just avoid the outside curb as well, and then once you're up through 4th and 5th gear, that is when you're going to try and get back on the loud pedal. Up the hill though, towards turn 8 I guess, or turn 7 I should say, you want to be braking from 7th gear just before the 100-meter board. Don't use the outside curb again though, otherwise it just throws the car around and you end up going straight on in towards that wall. So down to 2nd gear, try to attack the curbing as best as you can. This exit is really important that you get the car over the curbing to carry the speed off of the corner, and then all the way down the hill in towards the final turn of the lap there. Again, trying to keep the car in a fairly straight line. You want to run, obviously, the line of least resistance in towards this final corner, but again, a completely blind apex. Braking just after the 100-meter board, just before this curbing. From 8th gear, you want to bring it all the way down to 4th through the entry. Avoid the sausage curb on the inside once again. Allow the car to run wide off the exit of the corner. Foot flat to the floor then as we make our run back around towards the start-finish line. And there we go then. That is going to be a lap of the Austrian Grand Prix circuit. It feels like pretty much every single corner here on this layout is rather awkward to try and manage, whether it's being, you know, avoiding apex curbs, avoiding sausage curbs, trying not to use curbing on the exit, or having to get the car wedged over some of those outside curbs as well. It is really lethal, and, you know, it does take a lot of time to get the laps down. What I would say, though, if you're racing this circuit like a league race or something like that, is track limits penalties are going to be very, very common for your rivals. So find a system that works for you, work out what curbs you're willing to risk it on, which curbs you aren't, and then try to avoid getting penalties, because you will gain places come the checkered flag. Let's head back to the pit lane, though, and I'll talk you guys through the setup. Well, having a look then at our setup figures here at the Austrian Grand Prix reverse layout, 36.31 for your wing seems quite high, but again, obviously, where this circuit, the DRS is very powerful, obviously, in the dry. You obviously don't get access to DRS in the wet, but because none of the straights are particularly long, obviously apart from the one that's normally up towards turn 3, of course, is now downhill, DRS isn't as effective around this venue. Top end speed isn't as important around here in the wet conditions, so I'm actually running quite high wing actually around here. Again, it just gives you a bit more stability into the turns as well, and hopefully will mean that you avoid taking penalties. Of course, if you're going up against the AI, I would maybe lower this down to like 32.28, but 36.31 is the wing angle I'm using. 125 on your diff, again, fairly standard settings. There's a lot of tricky throttle traction zones around here, so just be careful with that. But of course, yeah, a few corners as well where you can lock up the fronts. Minus 3.4, minus 1.9, 0.02, 0.12. I'm pretty certain we've used that on basically every single wet setup we've done inside this game. 37.5 though for your front and rear suspension, a little bit more aggressive than we see around a lot of venues. 610 on the anti-roll bars, actually slightly softer than we see in a lot of places, and then 2350 ride height. Again, you want to kind of have the car pitched forward a little bit around here, but again, you want to obviously make sure that the car is stable into the braking zones. 5596 for your brake bias and pressure, the lowest brake pressure I think we're running around any circuit inside this game. Again, just because of how lethal it can be, how punishing if you lock at the fronts as well. And then 29.5 on your front PSIs, 23.5 on the rears. Again, for some reason on F125, Austria is a real tyre killer, so you have got to be very, very careful with that as well. So hopefully this will allow you a bit more flexibility in terms of your strategy. Thank you all so much for watching, though. If you have enjoyed, please do make sure to leave a like, get yourself subscribed. We will be back in a couple of days' time ready at the reverse Silverstone layout. But yeah, for now, I'm going to leave you guys, as always, with a hot lap.